little bit, guys. Okay. Right, there we are. Thank you.
To your right here, please. Straight down, please, guys.
Will understand that children cry, they wake up at night. During that week, there was one night, and we can't give too much detail because it's part of the investigation file, but there was one night where Madeleine had come through and one of the other twins was crying. So, you know, and when she did mention it to us, and we asked her about it, and she just dropped. She was completely fine. And we thought, was it when they were bathing, getting them?
Amaral has the right to publish the book because he haven't said any lie and he haven't offended the personality of the McCanns or the Madeleine McCann or the children, because what he says lies in the criminal case. Okay, he have the fundamental, all fundamentals that he says are in the criminal case.
On their return to Portugal from England in July 2014, Kate and Gerry McCann found themselves in a tense and protracted libel trial. The couple was pursuing a claim for over £1 million in damages against a retired Portuguese investigator, Gonçalo Amaral. The crux of the case was Amaral's incendiary 2008 book, The Truth of the Lie. In his book, Amaral posited that Madeleine McCann had died within apartment 5A, that her disappearance was a staged event, and that her body had been covertly removed and was never to be found. This publication also served as the basis for a Portuguese television documentary of the same name, further intensifying the McCanns' outrage.
There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
But then you hear
let me finish, please. There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there's absolutely no evidence that we were involved in her disappearance. Well, that is the conclusion. Let me finish. That is the conclusion of the process, and that's what we're here debating. The conclusions of the process versus the conclusions of the book. They are not the same.
Just 2 weeks after Madeleine McCann's disappearance, the McCanns established the Find Madeleine Fund, which quickly became a financial powerhouse. Since its inception in 2007, the fund has raised over $4 million. While a significant portion of these donations came from ordinary people moved by the case, it also received substantial contributions from high-profile supporters, including J.K. Rowling and Richard Branson. At its peak, the fund was reportedly receiving around £260 every hour. That translates to more than £6,000 per day, £43,000 per week, and over £170,000 per month. In its inaugural year alone, the fund amassed nearly £2 million. What remains less clear, however, is precisely how much of the money intended to aid the search for Madeleine was ultimately diverted to fund legal battles against those who suggested the McCanns might bear some responsibility for her disappearance. By 2014, the legal conflict with Amaral was in full swing. In Lisbon, Gerry McCann testified for approximately 25 minutes. As this was a civil trial rather than a criminal one, he was not questioned about Madeleine's disappearance. Instead, his testimony focused on countering Amaral's book and documentary, both of which had cast suspicion directly upon him and his wife, Kate. In April 2015, after nearly 18 months in court, the McCanns secured a significant victory. A judge ruled in their favor, ordering Amaral to pay them $500,000 in damages. However, their triumph was short-lived. In 2016, Amaral successfully appealed, and the original ruling was overturned. Undeterred, the McCanns took their fight to Portugal's Supreme Court, seeking justice at the highest judicial level. Instead, they were met with a crushing defeat. The Supreme Court dismissed their appeal, ruling that Amaral's claims were protected under the principle of freedom of expression. The blow was made even more profound when the judges clarified their reasoning. The decision to shelve the investigation in 2008 did not mean the McCanns had been cleared of suspicion. They stated that a lack of sufficient evidence was not the same as proving innocence. This leads us to the heart of the matter. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please tell me where you saw this video from. I will read it all and spread it to the world. In this series, we're not simply retreading headlines. We're delving deeper, meticulously examining the evidence, the contradictions, and the overlooked details that may lead you to question everything you thought you knew about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Spin around, darling. Right round. Oh, yes, I can see your wings.
It's a big smile.
Ah, yes. One more. Big smile.
In this episode, we're taking a step back to the 2 days before Madeleine McCann was reported missing. We will explore Gonzalo Amaral's assertion that Kate and Gerry McCann's phone records might have been manipulated, investigate the peculiar story of a quiz night at the Tapas bar, and examine other moments that simply don't seem to add up, the kind of details that might make you pause and wonder what was truly going on. According to police records, 6 staff members were on duty at the Tapas restaurant that night, all of whom were interviewed on May 4th. 2 worked in the kitchen and saw nothing of the dining area, but the other 4 did notice movement. The barman recalled at least one member of the McCann's group leaving the table during dinner. A waitress believed Gerry McCann was gone for about 30 minutes. Another waiter informed police that a tall man left for approximately 15 minutes, and a second man left for half an hour later on. When that second man returned, the table quickly dispersed because a child had just been reported missing. The McCanns and their friends also acknowledged several absences. Matthew Oldfield left at 8:55 p.m., Gerry McCann at 9:05 p.m., Jane Tanner at 9:10 p.m. Both Oldfield and Russell O'Brien left again at 9:30 p.m., and finally, Kate McCann left at 10:00 p.m. To put this into perspective, Kate would later write that the restaurant could only seat about 15 people in total, which means their group alone occupied nearly all the available space. People continued to debate this so-called checking schedule. To some, it felt as though the group knew they would be judged harshly for leaving their children alone while they had dinner, and while the apartments were nearby. The truth is, you could not actually see the bedroom doors from that table. A wall topped with bushes obstructed the view, and the only thing visible was the pool. Therefore, whatever claims were made about being able to see, the reality is that the children were completely out of sight. From the table, the apartment was hidden. Then there is the larger question, the one that has haunted this case from the very beginning. What really happened to Madeleine? Some people believe she may have died inside that apartment, and that a cover-up followed. Others push back, arguing there simply wasn't enough time for something like that to happen.
I mean, the ludicrous thing is what's been purported from Portugal is that Madeleine died in the apartment by an accident and we hid her body. Well, when did she have the accident and died? Because the only time she was left unattended was when we were at dinner. So if she died then, how could we have disposed or hidden her body, when there was an immediate threat? It's just nonsense. So, and if she died when we were in the apartment or fell and did something, why would we?
May 3rd, 2007 is the date forever etched into the Madeleine McCann case. But 2 days earlier, on May the 1st, something else happened. Was it just a random event, or was there more to it? On that Tuesday evening, the Tapas bar was hosting a quiz night. Madeleine would be reported missing almost exactly 48 hours later. The quiz mistress was 21-year-old aerobics instructor Najwa Chekaya. She worked at the Ocean Club Resort and ran the Tapas quiz twice a week. In the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance, Najwa was interviewed by police twice, first on May 9th and again on June 20th. According to her statement, the quiz began at 9:00 p.m. Roughly half an hour later, Gerry McCann approached her and invited her to join his table. She agreed and sat with them for about 20 minutes. Najwa recalled some small talk, but one detail stood out to her. An empty place was sitting at the table. It looked like someone had eaten their dinner and then left. Police pressed her to remember who it might have been. She couldn't recall seeing Kate McCann and wasn't certain about David Payne either, though she thought it was likely he was there. Later that night, another unusual event occurred. Between 10:16 p.m. and 10:27 p.m., Kate McCann's phone was used 6 times in just 11 minutes. Police files confirm the activity, but don't reveal who Kate was calling or texting or who was contacting her, only that her phone was active in that short burst of time. This raises a question. Where was Kate during those minutes of phone activity? Clarence Mitchell, the McCann spokesperson, later gave an interview to The Observer in April 2008. He claimed that on the night Madeleine vanished, the McCanns and their friends didn't take mobile phones or watches to dinner. "You had 9 people in a bar without watches on, without mobile phones," he said. Absolute panic set in when they realized what had happened. But if that statement was true, how could the group have been so certain about their timeline on May 3rd? And if phones weren't taken to dinner, does that suggest Kate may have been somewhere other than the tapas bar during that 11-minute window on May 1st? We can't be certain, but the possibility is there. At almost the exact same time, just minutes after Kate's phone activity ended, another strange detail emerged. Directly above apartment 5A lived a retired British woman named Pamela Fenn. On the night of May 1st, at around 10:30 p.m., Mrs. Fenn later told police she heard the sound of a young child crying. She made her statement 3 months later on August 20th, 2007. In it, she said the crying lasted for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Continuous, growing louder and increasingly distressed. The child's voice, she said, cried out repeatedly, "Daddy, Daddy!" At about 11:45 p.m., just before midnight, Mrs. Fenn reported hearing the patio door slide open, and then the crying suddenly stopped. She didn't see who returned home, but she believed it was the parents. So what does that mean? Was it Kate and Gerry returning together after quiz night, or Gerry returning alone? Both McCanns rejected Pamela Fenn's account. 4 months after Madeleine vanished, Kate was brought in for questioning just 1 day before being made an arguido, or formal suspect. Police presented Mrs. Fenn's statement to her. Kate said it wasn't true. She insisted that she and Gerry arrived home together at 11 o'clock p.m. and that they had each gone back to check on the children 4 times that night at 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock, and 10:30 p.m. The very next day, Gerry was also called in. He, too, was made an arguido before his interview began. Despite his right to silence, he chose to answer questions. Once again, police pressed about Mrs. Fenn's account of the crying. Gerry flatly denied it. He said it was not true that Madeleine had cried for 1 hour and 15 minutes.
The night before about being left alone, had she had a moment and got out of bed and started crying and started looking for you?
I mean, I don't want to dwell on it too much. I mean, I don't know if you saw the documentary last night, so I mean, I have talked about it. Madeleine made a comment in passing that, where were you when I cried? Not just to Mummy, by the way, just generally. And it just seemed a bit odd. I mean, it was a very kind of passing remark, and we just thought she doesn't usually wake up, and she woke up, that means that, you know, she must have fallen back asleep very quickly. And then she moved on. You know, she moved on.
Anybody with young children will understand that children cry, they wake up at night. During that week, there was one night And we can't give too much detail because it's part of the investigation file, but there was one night where Madeleine had come through and one of the other twins was crying. So, and when she did mention it to us, and we asked her about it, and she just dropped. She was completely fine. And we thought, was it when they were bathing, getting them?
Years later, in her 2011 book, Kate McCann makes no mention of quiz night. She doesn't say whether she attended, whether she left early, or even if she was there at all. What she does write is that on May 1st, Madeleine wandered into their bedroom after midnight sometime in the early hours of the morning. According to Kate McCann's own book, Madeleine once came into her parents' room and told them that Amaral had been crying and that it had woken her up. On the 1st of May 2008, exactly 1 year after Madeleine's disappearance, Kate and Gerry appeared on BBC Breakfast. There, the question of crying came up again. The interviewer put it to them directly.
The night before, Madeleine and Sean had been very upset.
I didn't say that, actually.
That was in the statement, wasn't it, that was leaked out? Was that not the case? Was she not upset the night before and talked to you the night before?
What we said is there, and it was the next morning, Madeleine had said to us, why didn't you come when we cried last night? And at the time, we thought that's odd, and we looked at each other and we asked her directly when she meant, and she just dropped it and moved on.
When it comes to the phone records, the details become even more murky. On May 4th, the day after Madeleine was reported missing, detectives seized Kate and Gerry's mobile phones. They wanted to see if the handsets held any potentially vital information. Former lead investigator, Gonzalo Amaral, later wrote in his book that the call histories on both phones appeared to have been manipulated. A call log is, of course, just a digital record showing who you have called or who has called you. But Amaral believed that someone had tampered with those records in the hours after Madeleine was reported missing. While police and locals were searching the resort, the streets, and even the beach, the record on Kate's phone showed something unusual. There were no outgoing calls at all between the late afternoon of April 27th and 12:45 a.m. on May 4th. That's a full 7-day period. Amaral described this as suspicious. In Kate's defense, she was on holiday, and many people make very few calls when they are abroad. But Gerry's phone was even stranger. It showed no calls made or received at all before May 4th. And yet, police noted that on the night of May the 3rd, the night Madeleine vanished, Kate's phone had received a call from Gerry at 11:17 p.m. Oddly, that call does not appear in Gerry's own call history. To Amaral, that suggested manipulation. He posed the obvious question. If logs were altered, why? Experts who have examined this later have said the same thing. Deleting call logs is unusual. Most people never bother to erase the record of who phoned them. If call logs were deliberately cleared, it would immediately raise a red flag for investigators. Weeks later, another detail began to puzzle detectives. Kate and Gerry started making repeated car journeys west of Praia da Luz into remote farmland along coastal roads and up into the hills. Their phones were pinging cell towers in those locations, showing their movements. Maps of these journeys exist in the Portuguese police files. All were made beginning June 9th in the Renault Scenic hire car, the same vehicle we discussed in earlier episodes. And then came the clash between what was on the McCann's phones and what the telecom company records showed. Portuguese police had requested full call data from Vodafone. The results didn't match what was on Gerry's handset. While Gerry's call log suggested he made no calls before May 4th, Vodafone's records showed otherwise. 9 calls were made or received on April 29th, May 2nd, and May 3rd. The Vodafone data also showed that Kate had called Gerry twice on April 29th, calls that were completely absent from her handset. Even more intriguingly, Vodafone's records revealed that Gerry received 14 voicemail text alerts on May 2nd, the very day before Madeleine disappeared. That detail was flagged as significant in a confidential police report, but somehow the report leaked. Soon after, UK newspapers were splashing headlines like Gerry McCann's text messages probed in The Telegraph and riddle of 14 text messages sent and received by Gerry McCann just before Madeleine vanished in the Daily Mail. Gerry himself later dismissed those stories in an interview on Portugal's SIK News channel. He said, "No one has asked to see any of my text messages."
No one has asked to see any of my text messages. There is no way there were 16 messages on the day, or even, the day after. The day after we got hundreds of text messages.
Gerry hardly ever sends text messages until after Madeleine was taken.
So, it's actually...
On the morning of May 2nd, the day before Madeleine vanished, one of the Tapas 7, Jane Tanner, received a text at 8:21 a.m. from a friend named Christine Flaxman. Jane replied about 90 minutes later at 10:05 a.m. Flaxman wasn't just a friend. She was a doctor and a DNA specialist at the UK's Forensic Science Service, FSS. The FSS was the same British lab that received DNA samples from the McCann's apartment and their rental car for analysis between 1998 and 2007. During her time at the FSS, Christine also appeared in court as an expert witness, providing reports on the results of casework. In April 2008, Jane Tanner was interviewed by British police on behalf of Portuguese detectives. Near the end of the 4.5-hour session, a detective asked Jane about her text message exchanges with Christine Flaxman. Investigators wanted to know why the two were in contact and what they had discussed. Jane seemed confused about how Christine's name and number were stored in her phone. The entry appeared under the name John Claxman. John, it turned out, was Christine's husband. Despite being friends with Christine, Jane even admitted she thought her surname was Paxman, not Flaxman. Why Christine Flaxman's number was saved as John Claxman was never resolved. Around the same time, shortly after Kate and Gerry were declared arguidos, the Portuguese prosecutor submitted a request to the Portimão court. He wanted access to all text messages sent and received by the McCanns and the Tapas 7 after their arrival in Portugal. His goal was to see the contents of those texts. The judge, however, declined, citing privacy concerns. The prosecutor tried again, this time suggesting that the text messages could first be filtered by a judge. Anything irrelevant could be discarded, and only messages deemed important would be passed on to detectives. Still, the request was denied, again on privacy grounds. Like the odd Claxman-Flaxman mystery, there are other curiosities in this case that continue to fuel theories. One involves the creche sign-in register at the Ocean Club Resort. Each day, the McCanns checked Maddie, Sean, and Amaral into the kids' clubs. Maddie was in the lobster group, while Sean and Amaral were in the jellyfish group for babies and younger children. Typically, they were dropped off around 9 a.m. and picked up at 12:30 p.m. for lunch. After spending a couple of hours with Kate and Gerry, the children would return to the clubs at about 2:30 p.m. and be collected again around 5:30 p.m. For 5 straight days, from April 29th to May 3rd, that was the McCanns' daily routine. But on Tuesday, May 1st, and Wednesday, May 2nd, the records looked different. On May 1st, the register shows Gerry signing Maddie into the afternoon session at 2:30 p.m. But there's no record of her being signed out later that day. And on May 2nd, the day after the quiz night, and the alleged late-night crying incident, 2 more discrepancies appear. That morning, Gerry signed Maddie in. But when it came time for pickup at 12:30 p.m., neither Kate nor Gerry signed her out. Instead, the signature belonged to Katrina Baker, the nanny in charge of the Lobster Club. Looking across the week, Katrina had signed out other children as well, so it wasn't completely unusual. Still, it stood out. Later that same day, another oddity shows up on the register. At 2:45 p.m., Kate signed Maddie back in. Then, at 5:30 p.m., she signed her out. But this time, the signature was different. Instead of signing Kate McCann, she signed Kate Healy, her maiden name. Over the course of 5 days, Kate signed Maddie, Sean, and Amaral in and out of the clubs 20 separate times. 19 times she wrote Kate McCann. But on that one occasion, May 2nd, the day after the crying incident, she signed as Kate Healy. Details like this, the odd change of surnames, the conflicting statements, later became material for the case's first lead investigator, Gonzalo Amaral. When he was suddenly removed from his position in October 2007, Amaral wasted little time in putting his side of the story into writing. By July 2008, just 2 days after Portuguese authorities officially shelved the case, he released a 22-chapter book titled The Truth of the Lie. In it, he recounted his 6 months at the helm of the investigation and presented a controversial theory about what had really happened to Madeleine. The book immediately sparked a fierce and protracted legal battle with the McCanns. They argued that such claims would seriously damage the ongoing search for their daughter. Their position was simple. If the public were convinced Madeleine was dead, who would still look for her? At first, the McCanns won a major victory in court. Amaral's book was banned, and he was ordered to pay them $500,000 in damages. Following the ruling, Kate McCann addressed the press, describing the book as an injustice against Madeleine, and stressing that the court had again confirmed there was no evidence their daughter had come to harm.
We are pleased and relieved with the judge's decision yesterday. By upholding the injunction against Gonzalo Amaral's book and DVD, the judge has agreed that there has been significant ongoing damage to the search for Madeleine and to the rights of our family. We are grateful to the judge for accepting that this injustice, to Madeleine in particular, must not continue. The court has demonstrated once again that there is no evidence that Madeleine has succumbed to any harm. It has also clearly shown that no police force is actively looking for Madeleine, even when presented with new information and leads. The motives of Mr. Amaral and others who have tried to convince the world that Madeleine is dead and who've also tried to implicate us in her disappearance need to be seriously questioned and looked at. As painful and personally damaging as the slanderous claims of Mr. Amaral and his supporters have been to us and our family, our primary focus has always been and always will be to find Madeleine. We're trying to achieve as effective a search as is possible. It is still incumbent upon the British and Portuguese authorities to ensure that every credible lead has been investigated and that a meaningful search for an innocent and vulnerable little girl.
But that victory didn't last. In 2016, a higher court overturned the decision, declaring the original injunction had violated Amaral's right to free expression. The McCanns challenged this reversal, but in early 2017, Portugal's Supreme Court rejected their appeal.
He haven't said any lie, and he haven't offended the personality of the McCanns or the Maddie McCann or the children, because what he says lies in the criminal case. Okay, he have the fundamentum, all fundamentals that he says are in the criminal case, all of them. It's not a thing that he has imagined. Okay, he made a conclusion. The book is a conclusion.
The judges ruled that Amaral's book was neither defamatory nor abusive, and that it simply discussed information that had already been made public during the investigation. Over the years, more than £11 million of UK taxpayer money has been allocated to Scotland Yard's pursuit of answers in this case. Yet, what stands out is the lack of open debate surrounding Madeleine's disappearance. The dominant narrative has long been that the McCanns and their friends had a casual babysitting routine, leaving their young children unattended at night while they dined at the nearby tapas bar. On one of those evenings, May 3rd, 2007, Madeleine vanished. This account has been accepted and repeated endlessly in the British media, but when examined closely, it begins to fall apart. There are countless inconsistencies and troubling gaps. Personally, I find it deeply concerning that questioning the official story seems to be considered off-limits. For most, that alone is enough to raise red flags. In the next episode, we dive into Gonzalo Amaral's explosive theory, examining the evidence he says supports it. We'll also take a closer look at the Renault Scenic, the car the McCanns hired weeks after Madeleine disappeared, and why it became such a crucial part of the controversy. How does hearing about these inconsistencies and alternative perspectives make you feel about the case? And does it change your view on the official story, or do you find yourself more certain in what you believe? As we continue to seek the truth, what do you think is the most important question that still needs to be answered?